Right. All right, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Hello, hello, hello. And thank you, everyone, for logging in this afternoon um, with our speaker series sponsored by the President's Office and BEA. I am going to have VP Critcher bring us welcome and words from the senior leadership.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cooks. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today with our special guest, Dr. Darrick Smith, who will be introduced in just a minute. I just want to, on behalf of College President Dr. Susan Sperling and the VP leadership team, VP Wagner and VP Thompson, just again, thank everyone so much for coming into this speaker series, into this space where we can all learn and grow and continue to inspire and better serve our communities together. So thank you so much for being here with us, Dr. Smith. Looking forward to your presentation and conversation. I'll turn it over back to Dr. Cooks.
All right, thank you. Thank you. You know, this speaker series has been more than just let's get people to sign up and, you know, and just kind of bring folks together. I'm going to, we're going to have a formal introduction, but I would be remiss if I didn't say that Dr. Smith and I go back a number of years. And I actually heard about Dr. Smith before I ever met him because of work that he did in Oakland. And for those of you that have done work in urban areas, particularly in a space like Oakland, the pool is very, very small. Everyone kind of knows everyone, or at least knows the names of the people that are doing work. And there's probably a handful of people that are doing excellent work. And Dr. Smith was one of those people that was doing excellent work. And so when we were thinking about this notion and this idea of who are people that we want to be able to come and talk to us about very real issues facing our school system, very real issues facing our communities, and very real issues facing administrators trying to create a anti-racist institution and organization and trying to create a space for Black, Indigenous, and people of color, the person that came to mind automatically was Dr. Smith. And so I'm going to let Sienna Dalton give an introduction, and then the next voice that you'll hear after her will be Dr. Smith.
Good afternoon, everybody. Dr. Darrick Smith is an associate professor of educational leadership at the University of San Francisco and co-director of the School of Education's new Transformative School Leadership program. His research interests are culturally responsive discipline practices, critical pedagogy, transformative school leadership, and social justice schooling. Dr. Smith is the founder and former director of Triumph program in Oakland, California, and formerly served as the co-director principal of the June Jordan School for Equity in San Francisco. Welcome, Dr. Smith.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's always a nerve-wracking experience to speak to other educators. I feel that, you know, educators are the most critical audience I can think of next to teenagers. I think, and educators at all levels. And I think it's for similar reasons. I think that, you know, the teenage experience is very much a visceral one, and it can shift from one minute to the next. And everything seems very high stakes and very emotionally impactful. And when you're speaking to teenagers, all they care about is whether or not you can kind of help them with that very real and dangerous reality, and whether or not what you're trying to express to them theoretically makes sense to them in a very existential way, with the highest stakes in mind. And so I think it's very similar to educators, that usually educators don't want to listen to you unless it's going to impact the realities of what they deal with on a daily basis. And so they can be equally critical. And for those of us that have to speak to these populations at any time, it's very nerve-wracking. And so all that is in my head, and I probably shouldn't have said it out loud because I'm talking to you. okay, so let me shift to my outside to actually talk to other human beings' voice, which I think is really important. Um, so uh, I'm here as a colleague, a former community college adjunct instructor. I was a freeway flyer for some years between Laney College and De Anza College in Cupertino, while I was also teaching in Oakland. So I would finish my classes at my high school in Oakland, and then I'd hop on my motorcycle. I remember 2 semesters, I had to make it from Oakland to Cupertino in De Anza in an hour and a half, okay, during rush hour traffic. So I ride a motorcycle. I ride motorcycles. I've ridden for 20 years very safely. I know no tricks, nothing cool at all. Just I know I ride motorcycles. And so I would always ride my motorcycle on that day, and I would do carpool, little lane splitting, but I would go the speed limit, or, you know, the Bay Area cultural speed limit, if you will. And I would make it just in time, walk into class at the end to throw off my helmet. And I did that for a while. And Laney was easier because it was Oakland. But the one thing that I loved about the community college was that it's the realest place to teach. It's one of the realest places to work in the United States, meaning that you have to deal with the public, and the public is coming to you to get something very special, which is an educational opportunity that they have earned as a human being, that they deserve as a breathing, living, viable being on this planet. And they're coming to it often after experiences that weren't that great, or experiences at the very least that were very challenging. And so they're coming to you for something very special as who they are, and you are supposed to deal with them and help them prosper as who they are. It's a very special experience, and I loved it. And I taught for a while with the community colleges, and now I'm at the 4-year level. I also was a high school principal for a time in San Francisco at June Jordan School for Equity. And so my commitment to these questions around what does an equitable learning space look like go deep into my being, into my personality, into my psyche as an Oakland native, as a dude that came out of Oakland public schools, and as a longtime Bay Area resident. So I'll jump into some things. I want to talk a little bit about equity. I'll jump back and forth between slides here and there. I don't know. This is not, you know, it's not 1,000 people on here, so I don't feel that comfortable sticking on slides because it kind of further distances us, like the screen already has done that. So I don't really want to do that too much. But I think one of the more important things to understand about what we're trying to get at when we discuss equity is the essence of the term, not how the term has been misconstrued. Through our lack of education in the United States, we tend to take things and misunderstand them and just run with the misunderstanding. I mean, it's one of the weirdest dynamics, but it's one of the things that identifies a poorly educated populace for implementing an authentic democratic structure, meaning that we are undereducated to be able to fully fulfill a democratic vision. And in that, we tend to do things like take stuff and we don't really understand them and move with them. It's one of the weirdest things. I mean, you can get, you know, and it's not only United States. I mean, you can get people who like rock swastikas and Heil Hitler and stuff after we fought a whole war over that. Now, I mean, it's pretty weird. You can get stuff all twisted around. So what we want to understand in equity terms of definition, and actually I'm not going to show you the slide, I'm just going to actually tell you, but maybe I can just show you the slide later. But equity is not really about equality. We always want to remember that. We want to be able to facilitate that idea and let that idea be known to our colleagues. And as a reminder, so I'm not really telling you like you don't know, I'm telling you more like as a reminder. Equity is about justice. The actual definition, if you look it up regarding equity, is justice according to natural law or right. It's freedom from bias or particular experiences with favoritism, okay? And when we talk about justice, when we think about justice, when we locate it in the context of a community college, we go, what are we talking about this stuff for? It's very political. And you'll run into folks that that will say that we're not supposed to be political, or they'll believe that the problem is not that it's political, is that it's political and it's only talking about Black people, or it's political and it's only talking about women. And all of that gets misconstrued and folks start to lose, they just lose sight of what we're doing here. You know what, let me show you something. What is that? Is that Fire Marshal Bill? Dr. Cooks, I think that's Fire Marshal Bill when I say, let me show you something. Let me go share screen here. Let's see, let's go there. Okay, hopefully folks can see this slideshow here. And so what we're trying to do, I'll skip this part, I'll come back to that, is that when we start to understand the context of a fight for justice, or even striving towards justice within an educational context, one of the first things we want to remember is that education by its nature is going to be political. It's going to be a political construct within any type of social structure that relies on stratification. Meaning that if we're in some type of society that has levels, and those levels of privilege and wealth are largely based on ideas of citizenship, gender, race, things of that sort, then education of the populace is going to automatically become a political issue. Okay, education allows people to become empowered. Education allows people to see how they've been disempowered. So once we participate in an educational system, we are inherently within a political struggle, okay? And so that's what the actual community college to four-year institution connection was all about in the first place. It was about a design that was politicizing, overtly understanding the political nature of higher education. And that's what the California Master Plan for Higher Education was. It was just clarifying that we have to actually provide some source of sense to this larger educational system so that it drives upward mobility to a certain extent within our current socio-political structure, okay? And the California Master Plan did two things that located the community college in a very important location. One, it's about differentiating the functions between UC, CSU, and community colleges, which we know. And two, to establishment a principle of universal access and choice. Now, that in itself sounds like a really good design to help your citizens move up the ladder. It's really good. But the problem here is that what makes it political is this section right here. This is what makes it political. And why would I even bring this up? I'm talking about equity. Why would you bring this up? Because it could very well be, dare I say, possibly, maybe, that not only is the community college an important location in American education, but it is possible that the California community colleges could perhaps be the most important location in the potential reorganization of the United States social structure. Okay, that's crazy. That sounds crazy. But look what I'm saying. Look what I'm saying. You have these three very important points of the California Master Plan. UC was supposed to select a certain top percentage. CSU was supposed to select a certain other level of percentage. And the California community colleges were to do this: admit any student capable of benefiting from instruction. Wait a minute. It's in the policy to admit any student capable of benefiting from instruction, okay? Now, why would I bring that up? Why is that so important? Well, because if you're in a socially stratified system and you have this state, in New York did it with open admissions as well, and perhaps even a few other states, but definitely New York and California were the spearhead of this movement in the middle part of the 20th century. The thing that makes this important is that you're actually in a location that has written in the policy that all people are going to have access to higher education. Well, that could be a problem, okay? That could be a problem because, see, if we have a structure that is maintained through privilege for some and the lack of privilege for many, providing an avenue for folks to be able to not just attain enough education to get a job, but find their way into higher ed spaces, particularly in 1960, could be quite dangerous if used properly, okay? So I don't want to take all the time going through this, but what we want to understand then is that what you started to see as people started to take advantage of this link or attempt to further take advantage of this connection in California and New York was a disturbance in the force, if you will, okay? And what you ended up seeing was an inevitable dynamic of working class folks of all ethnic backgrounds taking advantage of the knowledge and wisdom that existed at the California Community College in higher ed to do things to create social transformation. And this in itself represented a dynamic that resulted in a participation in ongoing fights for justice. And this is an important history of the California Community College. And let me show you one more thing. Let me show you. So hopefully this is halfway interesting. I mean, I don't know, we're on camera. I can't even really see everyone like this. But if we take a quick look here, okay, and start the slide from here. So what happens during this time in 1968, you end up with the Democratic National Convention, ended up in a whole lot of police activity and beating on people showing up to the Democratic Convention in 1968. This is what's happening in the 60s. You have the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party lobbying for civil rights. You had activities in the 60s and 70s and 80s of various agricultural social movements moving towards the rights of newly immigrated citizens, current citizens working in the farm industry. And of course, at the community colleges, you had the movements for ethnic studies and the rights for students of color, okay? Which was connected to off-campus groups, as the ones that I mentioned, and the Black Panther Party, leading to a lot of coalition work that was occurring around this exposure to particular types of philosophy information, literature, exposure to political science, exposure to these dynamics, and exposure to information and philosophical theories that helped people further link experiences between one another. Now, I don't really have a slide for it, but you can go on with the Young Lords and et cetera. And what we had even in the Bay Area with the Third World Liberation Front, which was this beautiful coalition between Asian American groups, African American and Latino groups, and working class white groups to shift the status and promote ethnic studies throughout the California higher ed system. Okay, so why would I say all this? Why would I say all this? It's because immediately these efforts were identified as a national threat. Now, I'll bring this up because we want to understand that the fight for equity in the California community colleges is not new, and the need for it, consequently, is also not new. Okay? There was a lull in our perseverance towards it, perhaps, or overt discussions about the need for it, perhaps. But the threat that the community colleges play towards those that seek to maintain injustice is historically documented, okay? In 1970, the Vice President of the United States noted that there's a percentage of Black students in college, too high of a percentage of Black students in college, and condemned, quote, the violence that was coming from in the streets and the activism, et cetera, emanating from Black student militancy. Not Black militancy, Black student militancy. And of course, this was the result of what folks felt and identified was too much connection now, too much access between working class folks of color and not of color, and access to ideas, to an epistemology of ideas that affirm humanity and affirm human rights. Connection, people to ideas and information and empowering resources, okay? He declared that, quote, college at one time considered a privilege is considered to be a right today. He singled out open admissions as one of the main ways by which unqualified students are being swept into college on the wave of the new socialism. Okay, that's your vice president at the time. And later that year, and this is from H. Bruce Franklin's book, and I'll give you the title hopefully later, but later that year, Roger Freeman, a key educational advisor to Nixon, then working for the re-election of Governor Ronald Reagan, defined quite precisely the target of the conservative counterattack. That's H. Bruce Franklin's writings. Quote, we are in danger of producing an educated proletariat. We're in danger of producing an educated working class. We have to be selective on who we allow to go through higher education. Okay, all right. Again, I'm bringing all this stuff up. Why? Because this is the reality of what we are up against. We meaning educators. Up against, I meaning the forces of those, whoever it may be, in and outside of our profession, that would prefer that certain folks do not have access to things that are restricted for the privileged. Okay? So then what does that mean when we talk about equity then? A couple things. One, that equity is not about Black people exclusively. It just so happens that Black people, other than Native Americans, has represented the historical target of American vitriol toward those who are seen as destabilizing the American way or the peaceful way of a democratic society. Black folks are historically symbolic as being that target. But the push for equity, both on the side of those of us that want justice, more justice, okay, and those that are targeting the populace with efforts of injustice, have usually used Black folks as one of the main symbolic characters of that fight, or symbolic groups of that fight. And that symbolism has led to very extreme repercussions in both culturally and structurally for African-American people. But that in itself does not exclude the reality that groups that are non-privileged, historically targeted groups, gendered groups, groups of different racial backgrounds, groups of varying states of citizenship, have been targets of this system simply just to maintain the structure of the status quo, simply to maintain the privileged elite status of those who come from historically elite families. All right, so that's one. It's not strictly a Black issue. But two, it is the issue that the community colleges must continue to push for, which is why it's in your vision for the state. The idea of addressing equity gaps is one of the core things in the overall state's vision for the California community colleges. And I have slides on it, but let me tell you this. It's not simply because it's the right thing to do. It's also because economically, you cannot thrive economically while marginalizing the bulk of your population. Right? This modern equity era that we're in really began with the Great Recession of 2008. Dr. Cooks might remember that that's when I was actually working for the Foundation for California Community Colleges. Well, a couple of years after. It was a couple of years after that. I was working for the California Foundation for California Community Colleges, Career Ladders Project, and all that stuff with Linda, and so. This current wave really began with the Great Recession, okay? And what we want to understand about that, without me taking 15 minutes to go through that, but what we really want to understand was that we had a huge problem in the Great Recession. People were losing their jobs, you know, the economy was going down the toilet very quickly, and we needed a mechanism to retrain lots of folks and get people trained to go back to work, many of which actually, in new professions, okay? We need to jumpstart the American workforce. And the Obama administration realized that, well, we don't really have a mechanism to jumpstart the American workforce. You know, we've been so anti-socialist for so many years, we don't have basic programs to retrain adults. We don't. Okay, and so what was discovered was that, well, and the Obama administration noted that, well, the only place we really have where thousands and thousands and thousands of adults can actually jump into, learn something new, and jump out of, is the community college system. Okay, they can't go to Cal to learn to be a plumber. You're not going to go to Stanford to be a certified electrician. Okay, those institutions aren't there to maintain daily life. They're there for what do they call it? They're there for epistemological development. We think about big picture things. Well, there needs to be an institution that trains somebody to come to my house and keeps my house from flooding. In Stanford, Harvard, they don't do that work. Okay, so here's the problem. When the Obama administration and everybody looked at the community colleges as a viable location to do this, they found a big problem. We don't graduate nobody, and we don't certify nobody, and that's a problem. Okay, you can't have half the people, less than half the people graduating. All your scorecards rate your completion rates over a 6-year period for a 2-year institution. Ain't gonna work. Because I tell you right now, if you can only get 43% of your underprepared Black people out in a 6-year period, I don't know what you're going to do in a 2-year period. Okay, so that was a major issue. Thus started, of course, Obama's original restoration. I think it was it the Pell? I think it was the Pell program that he reinstated. It's in my notes somewhere. But an initial signing off of $1.5 billion to be dedicated to the community colleges. And this big wave, the Aspen Institute and everybody jumping on board just to really jump into this community college reform effort really as an economic concern. And what you found is that over time, as you jump into the colleges to see how they've been failing these students for so many years, it's not because the people don't care. It's not because people aren't talented. It's not because you don't have great educators and counselors and administrators. It's not because of any of that. It's because even though the master plan, definitely in California and New York, and the master plan and the ideas that the structures that were here to support these colleges had an intention of them of supposedly funneling people out into the workforce and funneling people into other 4-year institutions. The monetary support wasn't there. The structures internally weren't there. The support for special programs wasn't there. Some of your greatest programs in California, I know like the Emoja program, wasn't even part of the itemized chancellor's budget of the system until the last like 8 or 9 years, even though the first Emoja program started in 1980. Okay, so you ended up with a will on the behalf of the personnel at many colleges, but it was never structurally institutionalized as an intention to move people forward. All right, so let me go on because that's a lot of historical stuff, and I only got a few minutes before I want to talk to Dr. Cooks a bit. But this is what I'm getting at here, is that when we talk to folks about equity, understand equity. Yes, we have AB 705. We have a chancellor in a vision for the state that is finally on board after all of these years with actually addressing the needs that our students have as the #1 goal, that is preoccupied with supporting programs, preoccupied with colleges extending off of their campus to connect with outside agencies and resources to support students. We have, I think, a very well articulated agenda for addressing equity. But here's the reality. The real work is on the ground every day in our offices and in our classrooms. It's about instructors shifting how they teach, particularly in the basic skills in the English and math departments, but all throughout the campus. It's in our ability to supervise the people that we work with in a way that is not punitive exclusively, but also supportive. How do we know when a counselor is doing well or not? How do we know how to support our counseling staff? When we think about how the campus functions, how is our security trained? What is the relationship we have if we don't have our own security? What is the relationship we have with county sheriffs or whoever serves as our security groups? What is our professional development really intended to do? These are the on-the-ground questions that we have to have in terms of implementing an actual justice-oriented agenda. Actually, let me show you this before I shut up. Dr. Cooks, do I have a few more minutes? Okay, so I want to just kind of get to this part here. All right. All right, share. Sorry, I ramble, not ramble, but I talk for a lot and I get all hyped up. You know, I don't drink or smoke, so it's like I got the like adrenaline of like a 12-year-old. Okay, let's see here. All right, I'm skipping through a bunch of stuff. So it's a nice picture of that guy. Okay, so this is what we're talking about here, okay? That particularly at the student services and instructional level, and I would also extend this to the executive management level, okay? And the reason why is because these are the high touch areas and where folks are working with students, okay? Is that there's two real areas that we want to work on that can all be addressed through professional development and supervision, okay? And when I work with community colleges, Dr. Cooks knows I've worked with 23 community colleges over the last, I don't know, 10 years now, maybe or so, doing different professional development work and advisory work for executives in the California community colleges. And these are the areas that I like to focus on, okay? That one, we want to develop our institutions as learning institutions, right? This is an idea that I think it's about 20 years old, maybe a little more now, the idea of a learning institution, meaning that folks come to work to do a job, but they're also expected to come to work to learn more about how to do their job better and why. And that has to be something that is an important part of the overall campus climate, which is things like the speaker series, things like other professional development work, as it's emerged over the last 15 years, has become more popular, I think, which is great. But in that, we want to be able to, if we're interested in equity, in order to in order to address justice, if we want to create more justice in our schools or fights using our schools to establish more justice in the larger society, we have to first understand injustice. And this is where we struggle often. A lot of folks are uncomfortable with researching, studying, discussing injustice. Some people would prefer to act like it wasn't there. But we can't do that as educators. And as educators, by the way, I don't mean just faculty, right? If you work on a school campus, you are an educator. So I don't know if they told you that in the job description, but it's pretty much the truth, okay? So as educators, we actually can't avoid discussions of injustice because we are a developmental institution, okay? In theory, we are here to help humans develop into who they want to be and help shape human beings. In that, all the things that thwart their development or hinder or stunt their healthy development are things that we must be in confrontation with, okay? So we have to be able to study, okay, and understand current and historical manifestations of injustice. We just had a great, huge presidential period of 4 years where we can study injustice in great overt detail, okay? We also want to understand current and historical forms of resistance. This is usually where folks fall short. I know I might be boring y'all for this, but let me tell you this very, very clearly, okay? If all you study is pain and suffering, okay? If all you know is pain, suffering, and oppression, okay? You are missing out on half, if not more than half, of the importance of studying injustice, okay? Our histories of resistance and success are hidden from us in K-12. So a lot of folks don't, half the groups I even mentioned, the Young Lords, the Black Panthers, the Third World Liberation Front, the Students for a Democratic Society, most Americans don't even know about those folks, even though they might be related from them, living near them. And those folks actually help to influence education in our country's politics today. But you don't learn about them K-12. So you should learn about them, start learning about them now. And understand the link between local and globalized contexts for struggle. Again, this is a lot of professional development stuff, okay? Whenever I mention study and context, that is professional development stuff, okay? And lastly, when we talk about actual practice, practice involves reflection, okay? That's the notion of praxis, right? Praxis, acting while reflecting while acting, right? Praxis, that's that that cycle, okay? But in this, we want to be able to do a couple things. We want to be able to understand our own personal communal stories. And if we are faculty or counseling, we want to be able to intertwine, right, our personal and communal stories into our work, into our discipline that we're teaching, or into our counseling practices, right? We want to be able to be personable and accessible to our students while maintaining healthy boundaries of professional and enrolled student, okay? Also, we want to be able to be clear about our professional and personal purpose. Some folks come to work because they need a paycheck. I get that. If anybody gets that, it should be somebody in education. We don't get paid that much, okay? But I get that you want a paycheck. I get that the place pays you, but you happen to work at a place that has to have a greater purpose, okay? Luckily, it's going to be somewhere in your institutional mission. Luckily, it's going to be in your statewide vision for moving forward. Luckily, you have language already written for you to give you some type of guidance into what the purpose of this thing is. But to do your work with only self-economic interest in mind is to be antithetical to the mission of education. Okay, so we want to remember that. Okay, institutional culture and operations. I'm gonna these last two, and I'm gonna shut up after this. Dr. Cooks, I'm gonna shut up after this. Okay, but these last two are incredibly important. Okay, institutional culture and operations is where a lot of the meat actually is. Who gets to be on committees and why? Where does funding go and why? Okay. Who actually supervises who and when? I mean, it's really hard to reform your educational practice when your faculty almost never get supervised, never get a pair of other collegial eyes telling them where they could improve, where they fall short, where they might be interpreted as racist, where they made a sexist comment. You cannot expect a person that does our type of work on a routine basis to just magically reform their practice with no help from their colleagues. Of all the institutions, education has to be really good at that. And from K through 20, we are terrible at it. Absolutely terrible. Okay, that's not a Chabot College thing. Okay, that's a professional, that's our industry. Okay, we're terrible at it, but you're not going to make the shifts without getting people into those classrooms, getting the chair into those classrooms once a semester, having a constructive dialogue, a supportive one. And then lastly, practice and pedagogy. This is what it all leads to. This is where the rubber meets the road. If you have faculty that are unwilling to grow in their practice, if you have counselors that are unwilling to grow in their practice, if you have leaders that are unwilling to grow in their practice, you have no shot at addressing equity gaps. None. And see, the thing is that we're not often hired for our growth potential. We're not often hired for our emphasis on equity. And even folks that are hired for an emphasis on equity usually aren't kept because they start to destabilize how things function, and through discomfort, people push them out. So as a Black man, I don't have a lot of faith in the elimination of equity gaps. I think it can happen. As an educator, I'm super optimistic, but as a Black man, I'm also very much a realist. There's been a lot of years. I mean, I could show you a slide, which I don't think I have it readily available here, but there is equity language in the addendum to the California Master Plan in 1987. The state committed to equity specifically in 1987. And folks are now still arguing about whether it's something we should even focus on, whether it's a waste of funding. Some people think that, it's all political jargon and there's no use in pursuing it. Some people think we're caught up in the times, or the racial discourse that was provoked by our previous inept national administration. So folks think, we're just talking about this because of all the Black killings by police and because of Trump. 87, man, 87. No, This is an ongoing issue. And if we are committed to educating our students, all of our students, it's not the students that have to change. It's the institution itself and everything that we think is normal about our work. And if we find that certain things don't need to shift because they're successful, fine. But that is no excuse not to look, not to examine, and not to have the hard, difficult conversations that make us incredibly uncomfortable. Because I tell you what, you don't have the equity gap without schools making it so. I'll say it again. You do not have an equity gap without schools making it so. Okay? And when folks tell me they got a new achievement program, and we got a new achievement program for Black people, we got a new achievement program for Latino students, I'm always wondering why the achievement program is so focused on students. I don't understand that. I get why students want to form achievement groups. I get why faculty would want to help students achieve. I don't understand for the life of me why a college would think that their primary equity agenda is in stuff that addresses students maneuvering through a corrupt and dysfunctional structure. Perhaps your achievement agenda should be one of complete, utter institutional reform before we cast the problem of matriculation on students that signed up to come to our institution. Okay, all right, that's a lot to say. But anyway, I digress. I have a lot more, but I'll quiet right now because I think I've been going on for a while. I don't know, I can't see you, so I don't even know if you're still there. But I really appreciate you giving me this time. I really enjoyed speaking with you. And Dr. Cooks, I'll turn it back over to you.
My good brother. Well, thank you. Appreciate the presentation and letting us know some of the things that we need to continue to keep in mind. I think if you can, there you go. Yep. And I think we talked a little bit about the work that we're doing at Chabot, and it's pretty interesting with the 10 by 10, right? And that we have this initiative that we're focusing on Black students, and there are 10 different teams of 10 folks, thus the name the 10 by 10. The groups are racially mixed. They're mixed by administrators, classified professionals, all these different, right? So the beauty about it, one of the great things about it is that it's we're starting at a large level, at a college level. You're not starting as a boutique program or initiative. We're starting big. So I think that the two questions that come up are, one, I should probably say this. Kirti, if you wouldn't mind, if folks have questions, you can put those in the chat. If you have comments, you can put that in the chat. You want to say amen or clap, put that in the chat. Anything like that, or if you're related to Oakland ESO or Hootie Hoo or whatever you like. But so with the 10 by 10, you can imagine there's a lot of different perspectives, a lot of different ways that people are engaging in the 10 by 10. And so if you can speak a little bit to, in no particular order, but the idea of the importance of starting an initiative at a macro level, as opposed to a very small piece. If you could speak on allies, interaction, and how they're integrating into the program and the project. You may have some ideas about whether you're calling them allies or accomplices, or if you have a different, right? I don't want you to go down that rabbit hole, but you could also talk about that as well. And then also too, this notion and idea that that at the end of the day, Black folks, Indigenous folks, people of color, everyone, that we can all come up together. That is, it's not a over there, over here, but that this is a movement for everyone. So I'm gonna give you those three, and you can start and stop wherever you like.
Okay. Okay. Yes. So I'll start with the question of like initiatives. So I think initiatives are important to, so let me back up. Let me say this. So when we put a program to help students matriculate through, navigate through a particular system, I think that's always a good thing. Okay, but in the history of that type of these types of developed mechanisms for navigating these spaces, we want to understand and differentiate them for what they are. Okay, so these would be historically noted as survival programs often. Okay, and the distinction between a survival program and something that's part of an institutional agenda is significant. Okay, so if I look at a program and I look at the budget and I look at how that program is allowed to function or not, I can determine whether or not it's a program over here that gets money, okay, or whether it's actually the early stages of an institutional, a transforming institutional kind of project, right? So one of the things that I would mention when I used to consult or speak with the Moja folks is that if you have an initiative that does not then in turn inform and transform the larger institution, then it's a survival program. Okay, so if I have an initiative and those people over there get to do the initiative and it has some successful results for those people, and we just let that run for 5 years, 6 years, but that in itself does not influence and impact how the rest of the institution functions, then it's a survival program. And I don't give the institution credit for it. I give the people running it credit for it. Okay. And I say that to say that we are trying to figure out ways to help students succeed. In the history of the University of California system, and I think you'll find similar success rates in community colleges with the Puentes and the Umojas and et cetera, is that some of these programs can have very high success rates when comparable to the larger population. Okay, I know the University of California had at least 30 years to learn from many of its EOP programs and how to help matriculate low-income students through. But it did not dramatically shift the overall functioning of the institution. Till this day, you can still get hired at a prominent four-year institution without having a lot of talent as a teacher. You will still get hired as a researcher in 2021, as if these programs never had results or their summer bridge programs never existed. So I say that similarly at the community colleges. Folks are like, how do we get Black students through? Umoja already know how to get Black students through. So the fact that you don't shows to me that Umoja rightfully has been a survival mechanism that I don't believe the larger state system can claim credit for because it refused to take leadership from it. So that's how I differentiate, okay? I go to campuses and people successful with their marginalized populations still don't have power on the larger governing boards of the campus. So clearly it's a survival program. All right. And then so for allies, I call them allies. I call them comrades in certain spaces. There's certain spaces I don't call them comrades. You know, I do some international work, and in some of my folks, comrade is not a powerful, positive term. So, but here in the States, I'll call them comrades, allies, folkers, folks, friendlies, all that Bay Area stuff, okay? But the important to allyship is understanding its normalcy. Folks act like crossing like identity boundaries is new and risky, but no, we got to reverse that. It's the foundation of our success as working class people historically. You know, I was on a panel for Afro-Asian American solidarity a couple weeks back, and I was mentioning what's his name, David Fagan, and his unit, that, that defected from the United States military and joined the Filipino side during the Philippine War, and how what was it, Bethune-Cookman and was it Du Bois? I can't remember. But there's a bunch of Black scholars and stuff were like debating, what is our role, in this war, in this colonial project that we call American militarism. And what I was trying to highlight is that if you go back through, you can even go back to the time when my ancestors was enslaved in the United States, okay? We had allies that were not of African ancestry, whether they be Native American, whether they be white. Hell, there were areas in North Carolina that the law was that a white person would get 50 lashes for teaching a Black person how to read, okay? So the idea of cross-cultural alliance is actually more normal than we are led, educated to believe. So I am all about alliances with white folks, Latinos, Asian Americans, Native Americans, queer folks, folks from other countries, whoever. What did Malcolm X say? It was one of his last speeches. The one, I think he made it at Harvard. He said, "I'm down to work with anybody who's willing to go against this destructive system." I'm paraphrasing. Malcolm's always going to be more articulate than me, but what he said, "I'm willing to work with anybody." Okay, anybody, because that is the reality of our history. That is the reality of the work. So I believe that not only is allyship a positive thing, I believe it's a fundamental and necessary thing. And that doesn't mean that we reach wildly out for whoever we can work with. We can still have boundaries in terms of vision and operations. But it's always good to reach out to folks and say, "Hey, this is what we're doing. We're down to work with you if it makes sense. This is what we're doing. We're willing to work with you if it makes sense." I'm all for allyship all day, because it's the right way of things, and it's historically the most successful way of things. I think that answered the questions, right?
And the last part, Dr. Smith, and we have about maybe 6 minutes, 5 minutes.
Okay.
But how do you incorporate the idea in a campus culture that, although there's a finite amount of money, although there's a finite number of resources, one of the things I heard at a conference about 2 months ago and there was a panel of presidents, and someone made a point about resources and money, and that there was limited. And the president's point was, the money and the resources is not limited, right? Like we have a X million dollar budget. We have infinite number of resources. It's just about who makes the decisions on how they're being spent and allocated. And to your point earlier, and how are those, and who's making those decisions? How are those decisions being made? How do you incorporate into a campus culture that, even with that going on, that there's a way for everyone to win? How do you preach that everyone can win?
Yeah, I would say this. So I'm thinking of 3 things in my head that I would teach my students, because we, in my department at the University of San Francisco, we train administrators, right? K-20, nonprofit administrators as well in the School of Education. And so a couple things. One, more transparency, which is going to lead to more inclusion, okay? And then being very clear about how you co-construct timelines within your overall vision for your institution. So these are things that I work with my students around. So one, transparency. A lot of folks don't even understand decision-making processes on their campus, okay? Most folks don't know how things happen, okay? They have no idea, like, all right? And so where certain decisions are made, a lot of folks don't know. Since they don't know if they can be included. They don't know how to become included, right? And the secrecy, or excuse me, the lack of transparency, I wouldn't call it secrecy. The lack of transparency makes people feel like they're not welcomed to be in part of those discussions in the first place. And largely because it's often true, okay? So for me, when I think about how do we kind of include folks into this, the understanding of what money is there and how it is to be distributed. That's one piece. Okay, so if there's committees, I need to know where the committee is. I need to know if I can participate in the committee. If there is no committee, there needs to be a committee created to where folks can actually sit down and have the dialogue about resource allocation and distribution, okay? But more importantly, and I usually don't say more important, I usually say as, but this is more important, okay? That there needs to be an increase in cross-division, cross-discipline dialogue, okay? And there needs to be spaces that are created for that dialogue that can be topical in nature, right? And this helps you actually create the committees, right? So if I am, if I feel that there can be some discord around funding for campus student service programs, if I feel that there's discord and competition, then I might want to create a committee where that particular committee gets full transparency of that budget and can begin having dialogue, not just about where the money goes, but beginning to understand and set a timeline for how money might be distributed over the next 5 years for those programs, okay? Now, I'm getting into stuff I get paid to consult about, so I gotta be careful, as you know, Dr. Cooks, because you taught me not to just give away everything for free. You actually taught me that, brother, but you know me, I'm a Sagittarius. I like to give stuff away for free. It's, you know, we all in this together, you know? But here's the thing. If you're going to do that, then some of your professional development is going to need to go towards that type of coalition building, right? And addressing some of the divisive topics and divisive issues on your campus in the first place. So this is kind of how we back plan a sufficient professional development plan for revising your institutional culture, okay? We go, this is what ideally we would want to have. Okay, so if this is ideally what we want to have, what are all the different levels of discussion that need to occur in education that need to occur to get us there? So if one day we want a multi-divisional, not multi-divisional, let's say we have we already have a meeting that involves all our program directors, right? And maybe they get to discuss what they don't have and what they need. But perhaps maybe we need to drop into more transparency about the overall budget, our budget projections for the next 5 years as a campus, all the different allocations, and to begin setting an agenda with certain ground rules as to how we proceed to make sure everybody gets equitable access and gets what they need, and be able to give that feedback back to the necessary, you know, vice president or administrator that's in charge of budget. So if we're going to do that, though, we have to be able to strategize around that and take professional development steps to support that type of activity. As an example.
Just as an example, Dr. Smith, absolutely appreciate you. I'm checking the chat. If people want to unmute to be able to ask a question, you can do so now. If anyone has any questions from the audience.
I didn't mention any culturally relevant pedagogy stuff either, but you know, they got you there, so they don't need to be asking me, I guess.
Hey, maybe we could do something together. Maybe we'll do something together. Well, I do know that some folks do have a 4 o'clock because that's just how hard folks at Chabot are working. If people are interested in staying for like the after conversation, you can feel free to do that. I'm just gonna say, Dr. Smith, thank you. To have worked with you for so long, and the audience doesn't know that I was Darrick's dissertation chair, and to watch him and to work with him, I've learned just as much from him as he has from me, and I definitely see it as more of a partnership and a mentorship on both sides, all the way through. Your work at the K-12 level, your work as an administrator, your work with community colleges and consulting, all for the benefit of trying to improve organizations and institutions to make it better for students. And you know, as long it doesn't matter what the title is, it doesn't matter what the name of the school that you work for or the organization that you work at. that doesn't matter. What is vitally important is that your morals, your values, what's important to you, and why you do this work. That's the most important piece. And so that transfers in any environment that you're in. So Dr. Smith, thank you very much again. We really appreciate you coming and blessing the silence today. And if people would like to stay, you can definitely stay on. And Dr. Smith, there you're getting a whole lot of love in the chat, so you can stay on a little bit and look at that as well. Thank you very much, everyone. Really appreciate it. Dr. Smith, do you have any final words?
Yeah, because sometimes it can be a little negative. You know, I was called a motivational speaker once, and the person that called me that, I don't think they were so sure about that by the time I was done. But so I will say positively, you know, if not us, then who? I mean, students have great, wonderful experiences in the community colleges because of your hard work. The limitations of the structure has not, you know, stopped, you know, thousands, millions of people from having a successful time and a successful experience overall. So while as a Black man, I don't have a ton of faith in American institutions, as an educator and as a human being, I always have to have faith in human initiative, in the will of individuals and small collectives to work towards the greater good. And there's a lot of people that would dream to be in our position, to be able to influence people and change how they think or improve or affirm how they think. And we get to do that on a daily basis, whether it's in the classroom or from an office. We get to support students in becoming better. And we just got to continue to take that opportunity and do the best we can, and things will improve. And if not us, then who?
Absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Smith, thank you very much. Appreciate it. This is the end of the session. And if you'd like to hang out a little bit afterwards, please feel free. Thank you. Have a great afternoon and a great weekend.
Hi, I do have a question.
Mimi, yes, go ahead.
So I know you mentioned culturally relevant pedagogy. I have read about cultural continuity pedagogy and how some feel that the next step should be towards cultural continuity in comparison to culturally relevant. Your thoughts?
Okay, so I'm just editing and censoring to make sure that I say exactly what I mean. Okay, so I think that's fine. I am not preoccupied with what people call these things. We are in a relational practice. What we do is not transposed upon an individual like data input. It is a partnership. The idea of relevance is so that students can understand what it is that they're learning within a broader context of social and political and economic realities. And so for me, the fact that so many of our educators, unfortunately, aren't even there yet would still make any term like cultural relevance, cultural responsiveness, all those different things to me, still very important terms for folks to learn and utilize. In the end, it's going to be whether or not an educator is prepared enough or interested enough in providing information to a student within a particular context that feels real and helps them navigate and succeed within their social environment. And so whatever folks want to call it, I'm going to be okay with it. As an academic myself, I know part of our responsibility is to come up with new information, new perspectives, and new vocabulary and language. That's part of our responsibility as academics. However, as a person that stays very connected to what happens in real life on the ground, to me, having a new term, having a new phrasing, having a new word is always going to be less important to me to whether or not folks can implement the practice well on the ground. So I don't argue against cultural continuity or cultural relevance or cultural responsiveness or any of those things. I think you can use whatever term you see fit, as long as the student and the realities of their social location don't disappear when you're designing your curriculum or implementing it. So that's my thoughts on it.
Thank you.
Dr. Smith, I think you have some, and I'm just going to let folks just jump in, but you have some graduates of the same doctoral program as you at San Francisco State.
Oh, really?
that are on here, so they can say hi. I think Marissa Traylor may have worked with you somewhere else, or Heather Clements is on. So I don't know if you can see everyone, but I wanted you to know that.
What's up, Heather?
I wanted you to know that you're amongst friends and family. So absolutely. Other questions?
I hope that last answer made sense. I hope I wasn't being too vague. So, Mimi.
Yes.
Okay, cool.
So Jamal, I have a question.
Sure.
Hi, Dr. Smith, thanks so much. Not just for wearing a tie and making me feel like I'm comfortable, but I love your words. And I really resonated when you said, and it's really a great challenge, how do we as a faculty culture allow each other to go watch ourselves so that we can catch things, like you said, of how could we expect to get better if we ourselves don't improve our teaching? And I love that statement. I'm trying to think of ways that we would change our culture so that, you know, you guys could come into my physics class and I could come into your classes, and we'd learn from each other while we're doing our craft. And we would learn that way, as opposed to this evaluative once every 3 years. I get one colleague to come in, and I can't learn from that. I can't learn from Kristen and Carmen, and there's some wonderful people on campus that are so much more in touch, right, that I could learn from. And I'm curious, are you finding any other colleges that you've talked to implementing ways that are a positive way to reinforce learning from each other on these non-evaluative kind of union kinds of things? And thanks so much.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and thanks for that. So I think a kind of one of the big historical examples of a college taking on this kind of equity reform pathway before it was kind of in style, I think it was Baltimore. I think it was Baltimore City, Baltimore Metro, that their main college that's been about a decade working on this, and I believe they instituted in a lot of collegial visits to classrooms, right? I think more locally, De Anza College had a structure for a while, and where department chairs were able to get into classrooms more frequently, right? And the thing that helps with that is that if there's certain folks that are designated to do it, and you know who it is, right? It's either going to be this person or that person. You know what they're looking for, right? And you know what the overall purpose is, that it's non-punitive, say, right? Then educators can work with those particular people and say, this is a date that works for me, or so it's not like a surprise or whatever. And then what ends up happening is that even if it's, once a semester, right? If we can make sure that part of the job description, part of the compensation package for doing that work kind of reflects that time and energy, and then we can have a structure for folks to be able to get in and do it. And then after class, there's time for a dialogue about dialogue, okay? Not a monologue, but a dialogue. And I've actually had that happen to me when I was actually at De Anza, when I think about it. And there's some things I missed. There was a woman, well, I didn't really miss it, but I didn't do anything about it. Like there was a woman, she was older, very kind, older white woman, and she talked a lot in the class. And so the person that was coming to watch the class, he asked me after class, I noticed you let her talk a lot. Why'd you let her talk so much, you think? And wow, it made me reflect. I said, well, because she's about 20 years older than me, maybe 30. And my upbringing is to always respect elders. And I was raised to never interrupt elders. That was my upbringing. And so it was a great, because his point was, I get that, I hear you, but you're going to lose the rest of your students if this woman becomes the person, the voice box of the class, regardless of what she's saying, regardless, okay? You have to be able to let other people's voices come out, and you have to be able to stop her. I give you not only encouragement to do that, but if you need somebody to say, hey, I know that's how you're raised, in this job, you don't need to do it, that's what I'm saying, okay? And it was so helpful to me because no one else would have seen that, and the students would have hated it maybe, and so that type of process and to be able to have that and then have them come back next semester and see, not see that happen again. While yeah, they didn't come back next week, they didn't come back, 2 classes later, but to know that the place is there to support me getting better made all the difference, particularly as an adjunct. So those types of things can be structured in, but I don't recommend doing it without also discussing, putting that into the job description, putting it into the structure, and trying to make sure that folks are compensated for taking that extra time out to do that work. I don't immediately recommend that you just set up a system where everybody goes to everybody's classes unless you feel that your faculty culture is supportive and collegial enough to be able to do that in a safe manner. So it's not something that you don't do. It's just something you want to think about before you do it. Until then, a midpoint is to have certain people assigned, chair, full-time faculty, maybe, so that they can get a little bit of training on it, a little bit of structure to it, and be trusted by everyone else to kind of start that process.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Sure. It's a great question too. I really like it.
Other folks. Thank you, Dr. Smith. Other folks.
Mm-hmm. Oh, this is great.
All right.
It can also be challenges too, Dr. Cooks, like, because I said some crazy stuff. So if folks want to, be like, I totally disagree with that, or that didn't make any sense. I want folks to be able to say that too. That's important.
Well, I think the beauty is that it will be recorded. And so people can, you gave them a lot to think about, a lot to talk about. So you can, people will probably go back and watch it, and they'll probably, if they reach out to me for your email, is that okay if I forward that information to them?
If they send the email, they'll get a response that I'm on sabbatical, but I'll still see it. So that's just so they know. DSmith13 at can I put it in the chat?
Sure, I think that would be great.
Okay.
Because I don't want to give out your Batcave cell number. So I think you just go ahead and have them email. Great. So everyone,
hey, Dr. Cooks, Dr. Smith. Whoops.
Oh.
Hey,
Go ahead, Bobby.
Yeah, sorry, I'm on the road, but just a quick shout out.
Hey, Bobby.
How you doing? Good to see you, sir. Appreciate you.
You too.
And look forward to catching up with y'all at one point when we can get back face to face. But just thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing wisdom, knowledge, the critical analysis, the challenge, and yeah, it's good to see you.
Thank you, brother. It's good to see you too.
All right, y'all take care.
All right, Bobby.
All right, peace.
Anyone else? All right. Well, with that said, Dr. Smith.
You're breaking up a bit, Dr. Cooks.
Everyone, thank you. Is that better?
It's a little bit, you're still breaking up.
Hello, is that better?
Yes.
There we go. Of course, at the conclusion, but thank you. And I'll pass your email along. And I really appreciate everyone coming to support this. The next one will be next month, the first Thursday of May. And so you'll be receiving information about that via email. All right. Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.